This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Sports Interaction. Sports Interaction is your homegrown sports book where local takes on an entirely different meaning, focusing on the teams, games, and players that matter to you. Sports Interaction is on the ground, on top of all the local trends, and offering prop bets that you'd never even imagine existed, from same-game parlays to a best-in-class casino featuring thousands of games and live 24/7 dealers. And now introducing the Locker Room, the first of its kind in Canada, a live watch party for the biggest games of the week. Sports Interaction, your homegrown sportsbook. Go to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN to open an account. Bet local. 19 plus. Please play responsibly. And if you have questions or concerns about gambling or the gambling of someone close to you, please go to connexontario.ca.
I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
Powered by Sports Interaction, your homegrown sportsbook. Always remember to bet local.
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ, your trade board is out. We're going to spend the bulk of today's episode talking about that and all of the big names on it. But we need to get to some news that happened earlier this week. Ottawa Senators. I got to admit, I'm surprised it happened. But DJ Smith, no longer head coach. And they have wound the clock all the way back to the early 2000s. Jacques Martin has taken over as head coach in his place. What are your thoughts on the firing and Jacques Martin taking over and what the Senators could do next?
Well, look, this is them reaching back into their past to try to build a brighter future, because they've also added Daniel Alfredson as a full-time assistant coach to their bench, with Davis Payne going out. And, this is a move. What you need to know is that the Senators absolutely did not want to make. My sense is that this came together very quickly after their loss this week in Vegas. They've been on a difficult road trip here where the team's kind of taken a step back. I think that, Steve Staios and management really felt that Ottawa was on the right track when they got back from Sweden. They had a run there. I think that they won 3 out of 5 games, but they were playing better. And then they've sort of regressed during this road trip and endured another tough couple losses. And I think they just got to a point where they felt like it was almost inhumane to send DJ Smith back out there, especially, with their final game before the holiday break being a home game against Pittsburgh. We've already heard chants of fire DJ in the Canadian Tire Center this year. And I think that there was real concern about what that would look like. And so, this is a stopgap solution for the time being. Obviously, Jacques Martin, into his 70s now, had been brought on initially just as a sort of a senior consultant to the coaching staff. And, it reminds me a little bit of what you saw Edmonton do a couple years back with Ken Hitchcock. Actually, Hitchcock also had a second tour of duty in Dallas, you might forget, for, part of a season when they were between coaches. And I think that it makes a lot of sense, given that they're also currently looking for a general manager in Ottawa. Typically you let a GM pick his or her coach. And in this case, I think that that's probably the order of events we're looking at. Although, Steve Staios, when he spoke to reporters, didn't really want to give an explicit timeline. I think he doesn't want to box themselves into any particular line of thinking. Point of fact being, maybe a coach that we don't know today comes available that's really attractive to them, and they move and make a full-time hire there. But I think, really the plan right now is probably to finish out this year with Martin behind the bench, see if he can get them playing a little better defensively. I think that's been a real weakness of the Senators, obviously not helped by their goaltending, which is struggled at times this season. But, that the playoffs might be a little too much to ask at this point in time for Ottawa, but they need to get playing meaningful games, and they're hoping that this change is something that will get the players' attention and allow them to do that.
Yeah, my next question was about what the players have been feeling about this, and you mentioned with the playoffs being a stretch. What a disappointing season for this organization that had a lot of hopes to make the playoffs.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's some parallels with what's gone in Buffalo as well. Another team in the same division expected to turn a corner, and it hasn't happened this year. I mean, even Detroit, after a strong start, you kind of lump those 3 teams together because they've been on a similar timeline with rebuilding. They've obviously added some nice young players to the roster in recent years by finishing out of the playoffs, and you're wondering if they're all ready to take the step. And perhaps the answer is none of them. I mean, the Red Wings have dealt with some injuries, but they've been on a losing run here. And so I see Ottawa kind of in that cluster of teams, and there is real disappointment there. I think that, they feel maybe that they need almost a little bit more leadership in their dressing room. They've lost some veteran players. I know Derek Brassard was an important player sort of off the ice for the Senators last year, and he retired after last season. Maybe didn't replace, the value that he brings to the team. and brought to the team. But they're in a difficult spot. I think that's why it makes sense to lean on an experienced hand like Jacques Martin, who's had a lot of success in the league as a head and assistant coach. Really probably was the finest run for the Senators organization was when he was in charge of the team. And, with him, and I think the way that Daniel Alfredsson, kind of carries an aura about him, right? When he's around these players. I mean, he's certainly the most impactful player in Senators history. The hope is that they can maybe push some buttons, maybe that DJ wasn't able to by the end. I know DJ is a really, popular coach. I think the players really liked him. That wasn't necessarily the issue, but as we see, most coaches do have some kind of shelf life. DJ had 4 years at the helm there. That's probably a little bit more than average, believe it or not, in that profession. And so, I think Martin is a short-term stopgap, but who knows? Maybe it goes well. Maybe we're talking about them keeping him on for next year. I mean, that's he's got. I kind of feel like when you've got the job in under your control, anything's possible. It's sort of similar. Drew Bannister was brought into St. Louis last week after Craig Berube was fired on an interim basis. The Blues are going to look at elsewhere for coaches, but if he does a good job, if he gets a turnaround, I mean, it might be a longer stay for him. So, we'll kind of have to see how things play out in Ottawa. But I think it got to almost like a crisis point where, clearly this isn't something that was on the plans for new ownership, but the season was sliding completely into the abyss, and they're going to try to salvage something of it still.
We'll get to sports interaction in a second, but I have one more question. It's a little bit more general. You mentioned that the Senators situation does parallel what's going on in Buffalo. That's another team having a disappointing year. Those two teams and Detroit, who's no longer in a playoff spot, have been on these long rebuilds. I wonder what their performances this season and over the last few years sort of says about rebuilding and how teams need to absolutely do it in order to get better.
I've heard this from more than one GM. Like, everyone loves the idea of a rebuild. It's kind of a nice title. It sounds like it's a plan, right? Like, this is, we're in the muck and this is how we're going to lead our way out of it. But there are so many cautionary tales out there. I mean, you go back even to Edmonton, who had all that run of first overall picks before they finally, in these last number of years gotten on a good path. But I mean, that took like 15 years of rebuild, right? When you think back to, picking Taylor Hall first overall, and a number of players after that, I do think that it is very cautionary. And we talked about Pittsburgh in our last episode. I think that's why in some ways they might be smart if they end up doing kind of a retool, but not, tearing it right down to the studs, because, it can just be a painfully long process, even if you make the right draft picks. Like, you look at Ottawa, the year that they took Sanderson and Stützle with the 3rd and 5th pick, those probably, even now with the benefit of hindsight, were the right picks, based on what they could do at that time. I mean, great players for them, but it's still not enough to propel them forward, on their own. I mean, the hockey is a team game. It'd be interesting to see where things go in Chicago too. I mean, look at them right at the bottom of the standings. They obviously rebuilt with some purpose last year, knowing, what the prize in the lottery was. They won that prize in Connor Bedard. He's doing everything you could hope for him in his first NHL season. And they're still a long, long, long way away, it looks to me, from being a contender. And with each successive year, the expectations go up. The fans want to see progress. I think that's really why you heard the chants in Ottawa. I don't believe it was about DJ Smith specifically. It was a general frustration from a fan base that's kind of bought into this idea that we're rebuilding with a purpose, but it just takes a long, long time. I mean, Ottawa, the last time they played a meaningful game, like truly meaningful game, probably is the 2017 Eastern Conference Final, Game 7 against Pittsburgh. Lost in double overtime that night, one goal away from the Stanley Cup. And, here we are almost 7 years later, and they haven't really sniffed the playoffs since. And looks like it's not going to happen this season unless we talk about some sort of historic turnaround. A St. Louis Blues circa 2019-esque turnaround would be needed for the Senators. It's possible, like mathematically, if you look at it. They have games in hand still on every team in the league because they had a very strange opening section of their schedule. So if they get incredibly hot and play at 650 or 700 winning percentage hockey, they can get back into the playoff race. I just think that's a tall task when you look at the underlying numbers. When you look at the way this isn't just about results for them, I think the underlying performance isn't there. And as much as a new coach, Jacques Martin gets hired what, on a Monday after practice has already happened that day. He's coaching a game Tuesday night in Arizona, a game Thursday night in Denver. Like there's no time really for a coach during the season to imprint much on the roster. Obviously, I think he's talked about wanting to just build up the players' confidence, because no one's in a good state of mind at this point in the season. They understand everything we're saying. I don't think any Senators player would push back on. I mean, it's really not gone as planned there. And your larger question about rebuilds, I think is pertinent. And we've seen some teams get away with not the full rebuild, right? Like Boston is the gold star example of that. They had a core of a team that won the Stanley Cup in 2011, went to the final again in 2013. They took a step back and missed the playoffs a couple of years. They drafted David Pastrnak, Charlie McAvoy, some other players that have kind of come in and given them another wave here where they've been a top team. They've somehow watched legendary players like Zdeno Chara step aside and Patrice Bergeron, Tuukka Rask, and still kept on winning. I mean, there are ways to do it without, finishing last and getting the first overall pick. Even Montreal, right? Let's see where it goes there. I think there's still a degree of patience around the Canadiens, but it's starting to get a little thin, right?
It
I mean,
is.
that's a team you know a lot about. I don't have to tell you. I mean, they feel like they have to start winning next year, like taking real steps next season. So this is kind of their last grace year where, I would expect they'll be trading away some top players heading into the deadline, focused on future assets, all those types of things. But eventually you got to win games. You can only sell hope for so long before that hope goes away.
Yeah, there's a larger conversation to be had about rebuilding, maybe a larger story to be written about for The Athletic. I mean, free story idea for you, maybe. Or collab piece.
We could collab it, bud. We could collab it.
I can think of a team that is on the verge of considering such a decision, and that actually might be a good idea for us to get started on. That's actually
look
a really
look
good
at us.
idea.
We're workshopping live. Like everyone is seeing how the sausage is made.
That's really a good idea. We should actually we'll plan this. We'll plan this.
Yeah, I like that. We build it around. We build the hook around where the Flames are at right now and the decisions they're facing. Yeah. And then maybe I call some of the GMs of the teams that started these rebuilds and get their thoughts or something like that. I mean, I think there's promise in that piece, my friend.
All right, we're going to talk about this after we finish recording, but in the meantime, let's get to sports interaction.
It's all part of the game. Yeah, I just gotta go hard.
Welcome to You Can Bet That. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. You can go on the website now and find the odds for who will win the Rocket Richard Trophy. Austin Matthews is the betting favorite at 2.10 to 1 to win the trophy for most goals. Do you think he hangs on and wins it? Do you think he scores, I don't know, maybe 60, 70 goals? What say you about Austin Matthews?
I don't think 70 can be ruled out at this point. I mean, as we're recording this, he's on pace for 72 goals, Julian. And that's even with one game missed. He sat out a game where he had an illness this season. And, what I see from Austin Matthews is he's back at the top of his game. Last year, by his standards, was a bit of an off season for him. The Leafs are counting on him maybe now more than ever to produce offense. He's been on a very hot run through December. And so that brings this conversation into focus. I think that the real number is even to get back to 60, like not very many players in their career score 60 twice. He did it 2 years ago in winning the Rocket. I think that they're correct to put him as the most likely player to win it. He's got the most dangerous shot in the game right now. And, looks a little bit like a man on a mission for a Leafs team, as I say, that's needed his offensive output. So I don't think 70 is totally out of the question. It sounds ridiculous, but, McDavid got to 64 last year. We're seeing scoring up. We're seeing save percentages down in the league. Obviously, those things go hand in hand. I mean, I certainly think Austin is most likely to win the Rocket, and I think he's going to surpass his total of 2 years ago.
All right. Austin Matthews, criminally underrated in the NHL.
No one talks about him.
Yeah, just completely under the radar goal scorer in the National Hockey League for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Another team that no one talks about.
No one talks about the fact he's scoring all these goals with pizza sticker on his helmet either. So, I mean, just saying.
I think the vibes per 60 go up with the pizza sticker.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. SportsInteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. SportsInteraction.com/SDPN. Go on the Athletic website right now and check out CJ's Trade Board 2.0. Are you ready to do 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, however many it needs to take before we get to the trade deadline?
I am, and it's funny. I didn't know that they would brand it as such. You know, I just do my part of the sort of the reporting on it, the putting it together, writing the blurbs, all that. But I didn't know they would say 2.0. I'm wondering, like, are we going to get to 10.0?
I mean, we're treating this like operating system updates at this point. That's if you have the brain capacity to do it.
I guess it probably won't get to 10 because, you know, I wouldn't imagine we're doing one until the new year now. That's going to be about 8 weeks out from the deadline. Like, even if we did one a week, it would take one a week to get to 10. I doubt we're doing one a week. But I don't know. This is brand new for me, right? I'm wearing the hat today, but this is my first go round in a season with the Athletics. So I'm not sure what the editors have in mind for that. But I mean, obviously we're going to be updating it more and more as we get into the new year and get closer to that trade deadline. And, you know, we'll see what it goes. It's bigger and better. I can say 2.0 is bigger and better. We went from 25 names to 30. And obviously we had to remove a couple from the previous board because Nikita Zadorov was traded from the time it was done till this one. And Samuel Montembeault signed his extension in Montreal. So his name came off too. A couple other names came off and a bunch of new ones went on.
Yeah. We'll start with the ones that are on. And you mentioned Nikita Zadorov, his now former Calgary Flames teammates, still at the top of that leaderboard. Elias Lindholm, Chris Tanev, Noah Hannafin, right at the top of your trade board. What are you hearing on those guys?
Well, I think there's certainly a lot of interest in them. You know, we start with Lindholm. You know, you're looking for fits around the league, and I don't think it's too hard to connect him to teams like Colorado, which would be looking for a top 6 upgrade as we get closer to the trade deadline. You know, Boston always has seemed to be like a place Elias Lindholm would go. You know, they lost Patrice Bergeron in the offseason. And you know, while they've had such a great start to the year, I think that wouldn't be surprised to see them make a move as we get closer to March 8th and address their center ice position. And there's really, you know, you look at the board here with respect to the other players, there's no one, even in what has been an off season, I would say by Lindholm standards, or a little bit of down season. Certainly production is not where it's been the last couple of years for him. You know, I think he'll still be in pretty high demand. And, you know, the bigger question for me with Lindholm is like, how much money is this season costing him or not? Right. Is this going to impact, you know, what he's able to make in free agency? I think he wanted somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 million on an extension when that was in the air in Calgary last summer, at least the possibility of it. You know, is he going to be able to sign a deal come July 1st that has a 6, you know, like it's going to be 60 million, 62 million, 63 million. Can he get that high? You know, maybe a trade can boost his value too. Not just with the production, but seeing him maybe, you know, play big games and have a strong playoff run with a team, you know, could be a big benefactor to him. So, you know, he might not get the money he wants. You know, we'll see if Noah Hannafin can get the kind of money he turned down, you know, somewhere $7.5 million on an 8-year deal. I think Calgary and him were talking about in October. But yeah, the Flames still kind of are the nexus, I think, of activity. You know, the Flyers are another team with a number of names here. The Montreal Canadiens have a number of names on this board, but, you know, the Flames have the highest quality players, I would say, to offer. And, you know, we haven't even got into any of their players that aren't rentals. I mean, the 3 names at the top of the list are all expiring free agents. You know, I'm not sure where it will stop in Calgary, but maybe some players with some term on their deals will end up moving when all's said and done as well.
I'm curious about a whole bunch of stuff when it comes to the Calgary Flames, obviously. I'll start with just between Lindholm and Hannafin. I think if you're Craig Conroy, those are the 2 guys where you need the best possible returns. We're talking first-round picks, prospects that can improve the prospect pool. I'm also curious too, and maybe this is just me throwing it out there, but you have the bloated contracts that you have, notably in Kadri and Huberdeau. You brought up younger players to let Kadri be better. Huberdeau's going through a pointless game streak right now, and ultimately you need better players around him to make that contract look better. And I'm just curious if at any point in any of those deals, if someone comes in return who can be plugged into a lineup now that could help out Huberdeau. Of course, they're going to go for the future, but I'm curious if that's also going to be part of the MO as well.
Well, look, I mean, some of this is just functional, Julian. I mean, the teams that are ultimately trading for these guys probably are capped out because most of the league is capped out, and certainly most of the competitive teams in the league trying to win the Stanley Cup already don't have much space. And so, you know, I think that there's opportunity in that for Calgary. As much as you want to create, you know, a window for the young players to play, there is a limit. You need NHL ready players on your roster. And maybe that's one way to make some of these trades work just from a dollars and cents perspective. If Calgary is taking back a player or two, maybe a young player, someone who isn't essential yet to the team he's on's success in the moment, but, has some promise and maybe is ready for more of an opportunity with a team like where the Flames will be, I think, on the other side of these deals. It's a good point. It's probably not just straight prospects and picks coming back. I think that you will see, the possibility certainly of an NHL player involved in those types of deals. Although, let's keep in mind during the season, that doesn't happen a whole lot. But I do think that, the Flames might end up getting a little bit of salary dumped on them potentially as a way to get through this, especially if there's players out there on expiring deals and the commitment isn't too long from Calgary's perspective.
And then one more thing, in terms of guys who may still have term in terms of offloading them, I'm very curious about if that opportunity presents itself. I've seen people wonder about the goaltending stable that they have. Obviously, the Flames want to bring up Dustin Wolf and have him be more of a regular. And people look at Jacob Markstrom's contract. I get the stats may say one thing, but he actually hasn't been that bad this year. But this is a goaltender in his 30s on a $6 million deal with a no movement clause. So I wonder about discussions with him, if that's even something that's remotely possible, at least in the moment.
I mean, it would make some sense. I'm not aware of any conversations to that end, or
nor am I.
Calgary putting, either him or Dan Vladar out there on the market. But look, I mean, it's such a weird year. Like it is just chaos in the crease right now. How many teams do you look at them? You're like, I'm not sure about the goaltending. I'm not sure how this is going to work. I'm not sure how this all fits together. I mean, until this week, Detroit had 3 goaltenders on their roster, and then they found themselves signing Michael Hutchinson on Tuesday because they had injuries to Ville Husso and Alex Lyon. I mean, I don't know. Right up is down, left is right, and Calgary also has basically 3 top goalies in their system. Or 3 goaltenders I think they're comfortable with and will want to give Dustin Wolf some more opportunity and runway. So maybe that's something we see happen, because it just feels like there's more teams looking for goalies than there are quality goaltenders available. And if you're going down this road and trading away other players, where do you draw the line? I think that's going to be what's interesting to me. It's not a surprise to see 3 Flames at the top of this board. There were 4 in trade board 1.0, and they've already traded one guy. I think that there's a lot of reason to believe all of these players will be dealt by March 8th, assuming they remain in good health and are able to be traded. But the question to me is, we don't have any other Flames on the board, but maybe 3.0 or 4.0 will feature some other Flames lower down.
We'll see. What about some of the other teams represented here? You mentioned Philadelphia and Montreal. What are you hearing about those situations?
For them, they've got a number of defensemen. I know teams are interested in both Nick Seeler and Sean Walker, maybe as a pair. Maybe the two of them traded in the same trade. You've got Rasmus Ristolainen there, who's actually, I know he's a bit of a polarizing player because of some of the defensive miscues he makes, but he's a big physical guy. And he's had an uptick in performance, I would say, with the Flyers. Philadelphia is willing to retain salary on a deal involving him. And so I think that at least brings into the possibility that he could be moved. He's still got 3 years beyond this season on his contract, but it's not an overly onerous cap hit. And if the Flyers retain salary, it gets a little bit more comfortable for some teams out there. I think Philadelphia is going to be active, even with the success they've had early in the year. I mean, I suppose the players can just keep winning and make it really difficult on management, but I think it's pretty clear. Well, it's been an encouraging start to their year that they've got the longer term vision in mind. The other one that I think will be a big market maker is the Montreal Canadiens. Yet again, it's sort of the third straight year that we've seen Kent Hughes be active ahead of the deadline. I think that's a team that I know is being heavily scouted by other teams, just being prepared. I mean, Jake Allen is pretty high on this trade board list as probably the best goaltender that's clearly available right now. But you've also got players like Sean Monahan. I've heard Mike Matheson's name out there, which is why he lands, in the teens on the trade board. Even though he's got some term remaining. I mean, there's been a pattern, right? The Canadiens traded away Joel Edmondson. They traded away Jeff Petrie twice. They traded away Ben Sherratt in recent years. And I think that if they can get a good return on Matheson, that's another player you could see moved. And so, right now, those are the big 3. I'm kind of keeping a half side eye on Seattle, where they wind up. If they end up clearly outside of the playoff window entering March 8th, I think they've got a number of sort of intriguing players that are pending UFAs. Pittsburgh's another team we're watching closely. Jake Gensel makes an appearance here on the trade board, and he's a pending UFA. I don't get any sense that there's been contract talks there, and he'd be a pretty attractive chip if the Penguins decide to move him. I certainly don't think that decision's been made yet, but he's someone that's got to be on our radar now with the way the Penguin season has started and the fact that I think he's a pretty big piece that they can play. And so we're starting to get a sense of where things are going, but certainly by trade board 3.0, we're going to have a little bit more clarity yet.
50 names. I want 50 names on trade board 3.0.
Dude, this thing already came in at 4,000 words with 30 names.
4K. Damn.
And well, obviously the names that have appeared on both, there's a lot of overlap. You still have to go through each blurb because sometimes you put a statistical reference in there that may not yet still be, up to date or so it's a lot of work. We will probably get to 50 names though. I mean, I think by the end, there'll be room for 50.
What about Tyson Barrie in Nashville? I know I'm getting to specific names now, but what about Tyson Barrie in Nashville? Has there been any update on him?
It seems to be in a bit of a holding pattern. I mean, obviously now we've entered officially the NHL's roster freeze here. And, the Predators have actually been winning a lot of games lately. And you wonder, is this thing salvageable? Like I would have told you a few weeks ago, probably not. Just because Tyson Barrie certainly was worried about the opportunity that he had there or the lack of opportunity in Nashville, didn't like being scratched the handful of times he has been. But maybe if things turn, maybe if there's an injury and they need him more, I mean, I guess crazier things have happened. The Nashville certainly though isn't going to be a full sale seller if the way they've played of late is what happens. This would be more about accommodating a specific player's wishes. But it seems like it's a bit status quo there, and really the holdup is what I would tell you for a lot of things. I mean, he still makes $4.5 million on the cap. Just teams have trouble fitting that in right now, and Nashville's not in a position to retain any salary on Barrie because they've already used 2 of their 3 available retention spots, and so it would probably be unwise this far out to corner themselves and remove the ability to do that moving forward. So I think it's a bit of a holding pattern for Barrie, but there's certainly teams interested in him. It's just the interest wasn't great enough. Someone felt the need that they had to go out and trade for him, before the roster freeze kicked in.
One last one for you. Is there a name on this list that you're really keeping an eye on that not many people would think about too much?
Maybe number 30 spot, John Gibson. I know his name's been in trade rumors in the last couple off seasons, and like the usual caveat, he makes over $6 million against the cap. And he's got, years beyond this one. So it's not an easy trade to make by any stretch, but I just think with the quality of goaltender that he is with with Anaheim, rather heading for another playoff-less season. I just wonder if the time might be right. And with so many teams, of course, looking to upgrade their position in goal, he's someone I think New Jersey's kept an eye on. A few other teams are wondering about him. It's a tough deal. Like the reason he's 30th on the board is because he's 30th on the board. Like it's a name that's floating out there, but I just don't know if that deal comes together by this trade deadline. But that one would be a curious one to me. If a team like the Devils, right, who, the young goaltenders they have actually been playing a little better of late, but if they went out to find an upgrade in goal, like how many places can they find that? Like, do they view a Jake Allen as an upgrade? I know the Devils have been around Montreal and shown, a little bit of interest there, but I don't get the sense that they're entirely sold on the fact that he could carry the mail for them in a playoff series. The view might be a little different about someone like John Gibson. The question I have with Gibson, and it's not on his shoulders at all, but he's been part of a rebuilding program for so long. It's been so long since we've seen him play a truly big game. Like where is his frame of mind at? Where is his game at? Can he handle that load? It's a bit of a question mark because he's been such a workhorse in his career, but he hasn't played a playoff game in a long time. So that's probably the sleeper name I'll say. And that's the reason he's number 30, because it's not an expression of deep faith that he'll be moved, but it's certainly a possibility.
Okay. Make sure to check out the Athletic website for the entire Trade Board 2.0 from Mr. Chris Johnston. With that, let's get to stick taps and wrap this episode up. Do you have a stick tap for this week?
Yeah, I'm stick tapping Jaromir Jagr. Wow. I love this guy. You know that. I'm just fascinated by him. the fact that he was a player in the NHL when I was a kid and he's still playing hockey. He suited up for Kladno in his first game of the season on Wednesday, and the guy just keeps on going and going and going. I admire the hell out of his ability to push forward, and obviously he's doing that to help the team. He owns the team, he runs the team. Was on the bench at one point for Kladno this year. He's been in practices all season long, but he finally played, so that delays his Hall of Fame eligibility to at least 2027. And I got a feeling we'll be doing a stick tap next year for Jaromir Jagr playing again. Like I don't think this is the end of the road by any stretch, but stick tap to you, Jaromir. No one embodies the love of the game more than someone who's playing it professionally into their 50s. I mean, it really is something that he's able to do that. I know that the Czech league is not the highest level of hockey, but I mean, come on, that's ridiculous.
Jaromir Jagr has been playing hockey so long. CJ and I can both say we have seen him play at a high level as children. That's insane. CJ, my stick tap will go to my fellow athletic colleague and podcast host Ian Mendez. I just think he's been doing such a great job on Ottawa Senators coverage, just covering this team as they're going through such a tough stretch. And then the DJ Smith news happens, and then he flies to Arizona to cover Jacques Martin's first game back as head coach of the team. I just wanted to show him some love, man, because I think he's really good at his job. He does an incredible job covering the team. He does an incredible job on the Athletic Hockey Show. He also teaches journalism at Carleton. Like, I don't know how he's doing it, but I've just been in awe lately of his work ethic, and I just want to show him some love. So what better platform to do it than Stick Taps here on the CJ Show?
Love that. Ian's killing it. You're right. And not easy to fly across the country, a week before Christmas out of like that you weren't expecting to. So good for him for not taking the option there. I think it was like a 13-hour travel day he had or something.
Man. Again, I don't know how he does it.
No direct flights from Ottawa to Phoenix. I'll tell you that much.
Still, he finds a way to do it. So he is deserving of a stick tap. And that's going to do it for today's edition of CJ Show. We'll be back next week with brand new episodes. Subscribe to the podcast, whether through audio or through video on the SDPN channel, where you can also find the Steve Dangle podcast and other great podcasts. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long and peace. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Ho, ho, ho.
Thank you, CJ Claus.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction, your homegrown sportsbook. Always remember to bet local.
Inside the game twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK and McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.